welcome to the 2024 and beyond, Creating Our Shared Future Town Hall series, where we dissect Project 22 of 2025 and its implications on our democracy. My name is Memory Roan, and I am the co-founder of Chromatic Black, a proud co-host of this event series. At Chromatic Black, we are narrative strategy architects working at the intersection of art, activism, health, and racial equity. Our mission is to disrupt the master narrative through good storytelling, and we do that in collaboration with artists across 34 disciplines, with organizations and strategic partners across the country. As states continue to weigh and implement restrictions for gender-affirming care for young people, we understand that the rights of the LGBTQ+ community are not just topping headlines nationwide, but also impacting lives in profound and often detrimental ways. What we also understand is that a sense of belonging, safety, and basic civil protections are fundamental human rights that everyone deserves, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. In the face of a destructive far-right agenda known as Project 2025, we must come together to defend everyone's essential rights. And that's part of why we're all here this evening and what we're here to talk about. That said, I'm very excited to bring you today's session on Project 2025's impact on LGBTQ+ rights in partnership with esteemed organizations and movement leaders, including the Center for Popular Democracy, Stop the Coup 2025, Impulse Group United, Human Rights Campaign, Equality Florida, the National Black Justice Coalition, and the Highlander Research and Education Center. Before I introduce tonight's moderator, I'd like to introduce Ashley Woodard Henderson. Ashley is an Afro-Latin, a Black Appalachian woman from the working class, born and raised in Southeast Tennessee. She is the first Black woman to serve as co-executive director of the Highlander Research and Education Center in New Market, Tennessee. She is a longtime activist who has done work in movements fighting for workers, for reproductive justice, for LGBTQIA+ folks, and for environmental justice and many more issues that we all care about. Please join me tonight in welcoming Ashley Woodard Henderson to give us a little bit of insight about what we're going to talk about tonight.
Thank you so much, Memory, and y'all give some love to Memory for holding us tonight. And obviously our gratitude to all of the organizations who didn't regard it robbery to bring us all together across our differences, across our identities, to make sure that we know not only what time it is on the clock of the LGBTQ liberation movement in the United States, but also to talk about what our responsibility is and what must be done tonight. You're going to hear from some of the smartest people I know who have been on the tip of the spear of fighting for queer liberation in this country. So I'm excited to be one in the number. I know that many of you are my family in real life, but just to continue to sort of sharpen who I am so you know who's talking to you, I am Ashley Woodard Henderson. My homies call me Ash. I use she, her pronouns. I am blackity black and a Southern supremacist, a dangerous homosexual of the South, as my friends and Southerners on New Ground would say. And I'm calling in from the land of a right-wing trifecta, the buckle of the Bible Belt, and a hotbed of Southern liberation known as Tennessee, the volunteer state. You're going to hear more about what's going on with Project 2025 and why folks that are a part of the LGBTQIA+ community should care about it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit really quickly about what I'm concerned about and what I think must be done. So I think you should care about Project 2025, this $22 million project that would be scary enough if it was just a strategy document, but it is that. It's also, and even more scary, a policy platform. So it's a strategy, it's a policy platform, and that would be scary enough. But it's also a database of people who are already planning to be the staffers in a Trump administration. And that would be scary enough, except that they're also planning to train people in the ideology and the strategy and the policy program for this really terrifying Christian nationalist agenda. And all of that would be scary enough. But I think many of us progressives, liberals, folks on the left think that this is just Trump campaign rhetoric. It's just this wild, random dude, this celebrity, this millionaire saying things that are hateful, and that's only concerning because of its narrative impact. But it's not just a Trump campaign rhetoric. They have a plan. They're staffing that plan. They have nearly all they need except the power of the executive branch to make this reality so. What you saw in the video, you've seen it. These proposals that will impact us and our families. Policy that will remove all civil protections and rights for LGBTQIA plus people and all federal rules and regulations that defines us not as people, but as unnatural, dangerous, and a threat to normal families. Normal, I use in air quotes. They quote, say that families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well-ordered nation and a healthy society. We know that that's not true. It criminalizes transgender and non-binary identities, equating it with pornography, which in the United States is a crime. It asserts that sex is only binary. So transgender or non-binary people, people that are gender fluid, are unacceptable. It forbids gender affirming care for teenagers and adults and explicitly criminalizes providers who give gender affirming surgeries or care for dysphoria. It forbids the changing of names, pronouns, and ID cards to match one's gender. It calls for criminalizing teachers or librarians who they deem as promoting us and our stories, books, or issues as criminal. It allows faith-based agencies to refuse adoptions for our families. It supports court rulings that allow anti-LGBTQIA plus discrimination on religious grounds. It allows workplace discrimination on the grounds of religious exceptions. It restricts the application of sex discrimination protections. It would ban us and all of our folks from doing the life-saving work that we've been committed to, and would also stop services and aid that would go to other countries that are doing work to protect and defend LGBTQIA plus communities. So why does that matter? Well, because even though I just really quickly ran through the list, there's so much more. Not only because there's more that specifically targets us in the community, but also because of all the other ways that the blueprint targets marginalized communities, because of other parts of our identities, right? If you are queer or trans and a woman or a worker or a person of color or a rural person or a farmer, any of these things also get targeted in Project 2025. If you're just a person of goodwill and don't identify as any of those things and have intense amounts of privilege, good on you. But it's going to target many, many, many of the people that you love and care about. So that's scary. And it would be easy to just get into a cesspool of despair, maybe even righteous rage about the plans that the right wing has for us. Both what they plan to do if they are successful in being able to implement Project 2025 in the first 180 days of the new administration, but also, frankly, what's already happening to some of us in some of our communities. But despair is not a strategy. So let's talk about what must be done. We must help our people in our communities hold multiple truths at once. We must encourage and insist that our communities are accountable to one another and to envisioning a future beyond this moment, as the great Pastor Gina M. Stewart would say. We have to acknowledge and appreciate when our people tell us that the moment that we're in right now isn't utopian for LGBTQIA plus folks. And we have to do the multi-tactical, multi-sectoral work that builds our power to govern and to take care of ourselves and each other so that we can build healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities for all of us. Y'all, now is not the time to do the work of the opposition for them. Right now is the time for us to come together across our ideological, regional, and identity issues and make sure that Project 2025 is not an option in the future, and that we fight like hell to be able to govern ourselves in the present, so that the ways that the right wing is consolidating their wealth and power at the expense of our communities can be stopped once and for all, and we actually can self-govern and do what we need to do to make sure that we all can thrive. With that, I have the extreme privilege to toss it back to Memory.
Ashley, thank you so much for that very poignant lead into tonight's conversation. And you are 100% right. An attack on one vulnerable group is an attack on all of us, period. So we will hear more from Ashley later, or we will talk to her a little bit more. You're all welcome to reach out to Ashley if you'd like to connect with her. I have the honor of welcoming today's event moderator, Jennifer Flynn Walker. She is a powerhouse activist and a very dear friend of Chromatic Black. We appreciate her being with us tonight. Jennifer is a prominent advocate and leader in various social justice fields. She is part of the senior leadership team at the Center for Popular Democracy, where she directly supervises campaigns focused on healthcare, housing, voting rights, democracy, and federal courts. She also oversees CPD's advocacy and mobilization team, which includes all federal and state programs. There's much more that I can say about Jen Flynn Walker, as we like to call her, or JFW, but I will allow her the stage and the platform to share more about herself and to introduce and lead us into the rest of today's program. Please join me, you all, in welcoming Jennifer Flynn Walker.
Thank you so much, Memory, for that introduction. And thank you to Chromatic Black and all of our partners for this series, this ongoing series, and for organizing us on how to fight back against this incredibly terrifying admission that there are lots and lots and lots of people in this country. And one of them is a presidential candidate who is ahead in many polls, who want to take us back, or take us to a Christian nationalist country, and who want to strip us away of our rights. I'm Jen Flynn Walker, and I'm pleased to moderate tonight's town hall on Project 2025 and its destructive impact on LGBTQIA+ rights. I'm the co-chief of the campaigns team at the Center for Popular Democracy, and we're a network of 51 of the most badass community organizations located all across the country. And I've joined many of the members of our affiliate organizations and many of you in the streets to fight back during the first 4 years, or the 4 years of the Trump presidency. I don't believe that he's going to get back into that office, to fight back against some of the proposals that are outlined in Project 2025, but there is so much more than I think that they envisioned in their in the 4 years that Trump was in office that is included. Every single one of the members of CPD affiliates, estimated at about 8 million people all across the country, will be harmed by Project 2025. And that means also that every single one of us all across the country will be harmed by Project 2025. Tonight, we're going to hear more about how the rights of LGBTQIA individuals like myself are indeed under significant attack. We're in a critical battle to safeguard our basic human rights and our bodily autonomy. And just today, Trump said on the Sean Spicer show that if he loses the election, he won't accept the results. He is an authoritarian by definition. He has said it in a million different ways at this point. And when they tell you who they are, believe them and fight back. And now there's actually Agenda 47. So now you're learning about Project 2025. There's Agenda 47 on the Trump website, the Trump campaign website, which is shorter, but is basically some highlights, some greatest hits from Project 2025. And so I'm just going to set the stage for this conversation on Project 2025 and how it is really just a plan to obliterate all of our hard-won protections that many of us have fought so hard for. The conservative movement's Project 2025 is a four-pillar plan. An 887-page mandate for leadership is the name of the book. It's an electoral transition guidance, vision, policy, blueprint, strategy document, and as Ashley told us, database of people who will take jobs on day one. It also includes a 180-day instructional playbook of regulations and executive orders that could be signed and implemented. And then the database has 20,000 people who have been vetted or have been gone through the vetting process so that they could easily be put into place in jobs in the federal government. And they have sworn that they are Christian, conservative, loyalists, and that they will actually support a Christian nationalist set of policies. If implemented, Project 2025 would strip away our rights and protections. It would embolden authoritarianism. I think it would actually lead to authoritarianism spreading at a much faster rate around the world. It would weaken our institutions that uphold American democracy and the rule of law. And you should not take this lightly. This is very, very serious. This actually can happen, and we have a small window to be able to fight back. There are proposals like dismantling HUD and the Department of Education, which is no small thing, taking away our housing and our education. There are plans to fire thousands of federal career employees, replace them with the people that they have trained who have sworn loyalty to Trump and Trumpism. And they want more people. They want to have, 50,000. There was an interview over the weekend with the president of the Heritage Foundation, the leading conservative organization that authored Project 2025 and the Mandate for Leadership. The document calls for erasing LGBTQ inclusive language throughout federal agencies, such as the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, gender equality, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and it also criminalizes transgender identity. It calls for the eradication of transgenderism, quote unquote, as they call it. But while they are dismantling the federal government from within, taking money and moving it into the private sector when it comes to housing and education, there are two communities that they're going to publicly demonize. And we already see this, as Ashley told us. One of them is the immigrant community, and the other community is the LGBTQIA plus community. So we need to make sure that, particularly for people who are trans or non-binary, that we are fighting and keeping each other safe, because they're coming for us. So Project 2025 aims to gut protections for our community. They believe that they exist in opposition to this traditional American family, and Ashley highlighted how they talk very specifically throughout the document about a family structure being a mother and a father and their biological children, which eliminates many people in this country, not just members of the LGBTQIA community. So you should be scared, but hopefully after you hear from the panelists tonight, you'll be motivated to fight, and you'll learn how to fight. We have a great panel. I'm going to introduce everyone with a question, and we're going to hear more about how Project 2025 threatens to rescind anti-discrimination protections, is coming after marriage equality, has an impact on employment and housing for our community, how they talk about dismantling the Office of Civil Rights, how they talk about eliminating LGBTQIA plus protections in education, how they talk about rolling back healthcare protections. Actually, they talk about rolling back healthcare overall, dismantling the Affordable Care Act too, but specifically making sure that there's not protections for our community, and how they talk about how they intend to promote anti-LGBTQIA plus legislation. So I'm going to leave that and turn it over now to introduce Brandon Wolf, who is the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign. And Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to know, what do you think about how might the rhetoric and policies suggested by Project 2025 influence public perception of the LGBTQIA plus community, particularly trans people? And what steps can be taken to combat misinformation and stigma resulting from these proposals?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Ashley. Thanks to everyone who's brought us here together. This is such a critically important conversation, and I'm so glad that people are beginning to have it around the country. I can't go any further without, this is going to be a weird transition, but I promise it makes sense. I can't go any further without saying Happy Pride. It is Pride Month in this country. We've been celebrating Pride for several weeks now, and I say I can't go any further without starting with Happy Pride, because that at its core is the thing that the authors of Project 2025 are so deeply afraid of. Pride Month, the celebration of Pride, is about leaning into our power, and it's that power that is fueling the backlash that is driving Project 2025 and its Christian nationalist authors. Someone asked me recently what I think about the word queer, not as a noun or an adjective, but as a verb. What does it mean to queer something? And in my eyes, the word queer as a verb means to liberate. It means to free from the confines of regressive ideology. Our very existence as queer people is the kind of liberation that terrifies people like the Heritage Foundation. It's the kind of liberation that terrifies people like Donald Trump because they can't control it. I've said often, if you want to know what it feels like to be free of a patriarchal structure that tells you that boys like blue and girls like pink, and if you go to McDonald's, you can only order the Happy Meal with the Barbie or the Hot Wheels. If you want to be free of that structure, you should ask someone who's already creating that world right before our eyes. You should ask a trans person what it might feel like to be free of that regressive patriarchal structure. And I say that because it is that power of a liberated populace who believe in their authentic selves, who believe fully in their identities, that is incapable of being controlled by right-wing extremists. And so they've created this structure to try to rob us of the language, to identify, to try to keep us from sharing our stories, to try to legislate us out of existence. And again, I say Happy Pride because that's impossible. You cannot put this genie back in the bottle. This community is not going anywhere, no matter what kind of policies you put forward or legislation you propose. The question you asked is an important one, which is, what's the impact, right? What's the impact, not just of putting forward policies like we've seen and in red states across the country? By the way, those are test runs for what they're trying to do with Project 2025. But what's the impact of them talking about LGBTQ plus people in that way? Well, the intended impact is that our lives, our existence is used as a wedge issue. They feel like they can create a boogeyman out of LGBTQ plus people, that they can drive a wedge in society, that they can divide us across societal lines so that they can conquer us in smaller groups. But make no mistake, they are using LGBTQ plus people, our identities, the language we use to describe ourselves, as a euphemism for freedom. They see LGBTQ plus people as a symbol of the kind of uncontrollable, uncontained freedom that is antithetical to the systems that they have been milking for a very long time for their own power. And so that is the end goal, right? Is to drive stigma, to drive a wedge in society, to use us as a division tactic, to then conquer all of these smaller communities. But the end goal for everyone remains the same: mandated conformity, this insistence that there's only one right way to be a human being. And if you refuse to conform to that idea of what it means to be a human being, then we will use the power of government to punish you until you give in, until you are forced into submission. And the second part of your question perhaps is even more important than the first, which is, so what do we do about that? How do we inoculate ourselves to a messaging campaign, to rhetoric that is designed to incite violence against people, that is designed to demonize and dehumanize people, that is designed to desensitize people to bigotry and hate in their own communities? What do we do about rhetoric that is driving up instances of hate crimes against LGBTQ plus people across the country? What do we do about rhetoric that's driving up suicidality and mental health crisis in LGBTQ plus young people? And the simple answer is we continue to tell stories. It's really hard to sign on to an anti-freedom authoritarian agenda when it's your neighbor that's on the other end of that agenda. It's easy to do it when everything feels like a textbook, when everything feels theoretical, when it's us versus them, and the them is just some shadowy ideology hiding in the closet. It's so much harder when the trans person you're talking about ripping from a doctor's office is your neighbor, or is your kid's teacher, or is the person who helps load the groceries into the car at Publix down the street. It's so much harder to sign on to that anti-freedom agenda when we see each other as human beings. And so one of the biggest things that we have to do, and it's, you know, one of my primary functions at the Human Rights Campaign, is to make sure that every time LGBTQ plus issues are in conversation, that our voices are at that table, that we are lifting people, especially trans people, not just when they are in a state of crisis or under siege, but sharing the beauty that they bring to the world every single day, that trans people are not just those who are under attack from right-wing politicians, are also business owners and parents and the people we love the most in our communities. It's not going to solve everything to share our stories. We have to beat Donald Trump. We have to send Project 2025 into the oblivion it belongs. But if we're going to win the long-term democratic struggle for a more equal, more just society where nobody even thinks something like Project 2025 is a reasonable thing to propose, we're going to have to do it by sharing our stories. We're going to have to do it by being unapologetic and authentic every single day, by daring people to imagine a world where the freedom we're offering is so big and so bold that they want to be a part of it too. And I dare say we have to get there by celebrating proudly who we are. So I'll just end where I started, which is happy Pride, everybody.
Thank you, Brandon. I love that. I'm going to now introduce a hero of mine, Anne-Christine Tedeschi, who's the founder of Stop the Coup 2025. Anne-Christine found out about Project 2025, doing research for another project. I'm sure she'll tell us about it. And then organized me and a lot of other people and told us about Project 2025 and organized us, not forced us, organized us to tell others. So I am very grateful for that. And also through a volunteer effort, read all 997 pages, or is it 890? There's always this debate, pages of Mandate for Leadership, and wrote it out into chapters and put it up on a website that are smaller, easier to digest, just 30, a couple pages, so that all of us could get through it. And you can go to the website, stopthecoup2025.org, and you can read in all the different chapters. It's very well laid out, and Anne will tell us more. So Anne, my question to you is, how does Project 2025 propose to redefine the concepts of sexual orientation and gender identity in federal regulations and policies?
First of all, thanks to everyone, and thank you to Chromatic Black and Center for Popular Democracy. I'm glad we're here. It's been about a couple of months since we began, and no one knew about Project 2025, and now a lot more people do. And I'm hoping that we can share a lot of the strategies that we're seeing that have emerged. The good news, of course, is that there is a resistance, and happily all the people here, when they leave this call, will be part of it. To answer your question specifically, well, as you guys have noted, I think everyone has spoken to this. The main thing about Project 2025 is it proposes to essentially remove the references to gender identity from all federal rules and regulations. And what that really means is it's going to strip federal protections from LGBTQIA people, with the possible exception of employment. The other thing is that it really seeks to criminalize transgender identity in a different way. It criminalizes the transgender ideology, that's a quote unquote, as pornography. And in that way, it really calls for it to be outlawed. So for example, somebody who is maybe offering an LGBT book, like a librarian or someone at a school, could potentially be accused of being a sex offender. And that's in the document. I think the other really important point is to know that we haven't talked about this too much here, but I want to. This must be looked at and understood as a Christian nationalist project. Project 2025 is a manifestation of a Christian, white supremacist, very racist ideology. And it has a greater vision. And a lot of the people who are part of it and who are participating are Christian fundamentalist groups. So I think it's really important to understand, because what it proposes to do throughout the entire government, and of course in all global policy, is make all of the US laws and policies essentially adhere to biblical doctrines. It's a it's an anti-choice, anti-diversity, anti-queer agenda. And it also, like, if you're somebody who really knows the Bible and you really knows Christian nationalism, you'd be shocked to see how many actual references there are to some of the very known concepts and terms in the Christian nationalist movement that are actually embedded in Project 2025. It's a long vision, as you say, and maybe you say it's not new. However, there are some really important pieces. And the other piece I'd say, in terms of thinking really about, what does it mean to have references to gender removed, is it's a very deeply judicial kind of activist document as well. It calls for a court-based approach to stripping our federal protections. So as you noted, Jennifer, and I think Brandon knows this too, everything that's been happening in the courts for the past 2 years since 2022 is in fact a test run. So what I like to tell people is this is not abstract. It's not something coming in 2025. It's unfolding now. And you have the groups that are advisory groups to Project 2025, some of whom are hate groups. And these are also people who have not only advanced the anti-DEI and the anti-CRT and all of the anti-trans attacks, they're exporting this ideology, including the Christian ideology globally. And they're also behind the criminalization that we have seen in places like Uganda and South Africa and Namibia, et cetera. So we have to understand that this is part of a larger project. And we also have to understand the goal. It is not merely remaking our federal government. It's not merely hollowing out our government and putting in place essentially a partisan government. It's not merely hollowing out the ability of the federal government and privatizing a lot of it. It's also advancing Christian fundamentalism. That is the goal. And we need to understand it, and we need to talk about Christian fundamentalism, because it would seek to erode the separation of church and state, which is really a bedrock also of our democracy and our Bill of Rights. So it's not just, demolishing checks and balances. It's putting in place what some people would call not just authoritarianism or just the beginning of autocracy, but a theocracy.
Thank you so much for that. It is so important that when we're reading this, we really look for those keywords that highlight how this is, in fact, a Christian nationalist document, and that this is not just about one party versus the other. I'd like to introduce our third panelist, Victoria Kirby York, the Director of Public Policy for National Black Justice Coalition. Victoria has been an organizer for 20 years, worked for Organizing for America for the Obama administration, and we are so grateful to have them join us today. Victoria, what are different ways Project 2025 would impact recent gains of the LGBTQIA+ movement in areas of discrimination in employment, family and adoption policies, and marriage?
Oh, what a great question. It's one of the questions that keeps me up late at night. Project 2025 would, simply put, gut a lot of the federal protections that we've been able to finally, after years and decades of pushing the federal government to act, have been able to enjoy under the current administration. Some of you might remember on day one of President Biden's term in office, he signed 2 executive orders. He probably signed more than that, but there's 2 that I'm going to focus on today. One tackled forced every single agency in the federal government to tackle systemic racism and racial inequities that were baked inside of federal government going back many, many years and generations. The second executive order took the Bostock decision from the U.S. Supreme Court that included the LGBTQ+ community. Really, it included sex stereotyping in ways that allowed for LGBTQ folks to be included in the legal definition of sex, and use that language, use that ruling to ensure that LGBTQ I and same gender loving people were included in protections that other federal agencies were responsible for implementing under various civil rights laws. Looking at Title IX specifically in terms of education and ensuring that LGBTQ kids and others in the school system have non-discrimination protections. There are rules that were just rolled out for final conversation about that are a result of this executive order. There's also protections in healthcare that help to ensure that when we are sick and go to Seventh-day Adventist hospital, which is the closest hospital to me, that I cannot be turned away, discriminated against legally because I came in with my wife and child. It ensured that in looking at ways to provide reparations for LGBTQ plus folks who are discriminated against because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or the Defense of Marriage Act, that agencies have created programs, and the president has signed additional executive orders and made other actions to ensure that folks are able to get what they were owed. Service members are now able to, just today, were pardoned from related offenses to basically being either pushed out or inviting folks in, as we call it at NBJC, and weren't able to take advantage of their full veterans benefits. You also have people's ability, if your partner passed before marriage equality became law of the land, folks had the ability and have the ability to seek federal financial support that one typically would get when a spouse passes in terms of Social Security and some of these other programs. These are things that we can't take for granted and were not necessarily because of an act of Congress. They were because we had someone in office and people in place, which is what they're trying to do with Project 2025 and dismantling all of this, who are able to say, how can we uproot systemic inequities? These are our action plans. Let's get it done. And just as easily, and as those policies were able to be moved during this administration on day one, what we're hearing from Project 2025 is that they want to completely dismantle and turn back the clock on some of those wins. And those are just some. You can go to whitehouse.gov/equity and you can see all of the different plans that were submitted in 2022 that now all of the agencies are working towards. And you'll also see exactly what Project 2025 folks will be dismantling on day one of a conservative administration. Even the definition of family and including chosen family and how family is defined in different agencies, whether it comes to the child welfare programs, housing programs, et cetera, has been really invaluable, especially in supporting homeless youth, which we know LGBTQ youth are disproportionately represented in. When we look at employment protections, yes, the Bostock decision does a lot for us, but without the Equality Act, there are a ton of other protections that we just won't have fully. It will be up to whoever, has the Oval Office. When we look at DEI programs that are being gutted across the country right now, there's a focus on essentially prioritizing some people and some families at the risk of harming and excluding the rest of us. And so I could talk more about these things. You can learn more about some of the programs that I referenced on NBJC at nbjc.org. Our policy agenda, which I'll drop in the chat, highlights some of these newer programs and policies that were put in place, as well as some of the things that we want to be able to continue to fight for if we have an administration that is friendly and ready to continue to fight for us.
Thank you so much. I just want to invite all of the audience to use the question and answer, the Q&A feature on Zoom, which is down in the middle of your screen. And feel free to ask all of the panelists questions and we'll try to get through it. I did a training on Project 2025 this weekend, and half of the training was just people asking questions about different government agencies or their own individual scenario and how would that impact them. And most of the time, the answer was that it was in fact included in Project 2025, and it, was going to end poorly if we allowed Project 2025 to become implemented. I'd love to introduce and welcome Nadine Smith, who's the co-founder and CEO of Equality Florida. So Nadine, Florida has certainly been at the forefront of implementation of some aspects of Project 2025, an early adopter, I guess we could say. So what insights can you provide to the rest of us?
You know, I think it's really important when that we understand that you never relinquish the front line in a fight for many reasons. But one of them is we actually get to see our opposition as exactly who they are. And I think the biggest message I have from Florida is twofold. The first part of it is that you should expect shock and awe. This will not be gradual, what they intend to do. The entire purpose of this document is from day one to dismantle civil rights, to dismantle advancements for the LGBTQ community, to strip bodily autonomy. Their intention is to do it just as authoritarians have done it elsewhere, in a manner that leaves us in a state of disequilibrium and fear. And the speed with which institutions can crumble in this kind of scenario, we have to internalize right now the understanding that there are no guardrails that will hold. When you study fascism in other countries, when you study how authoritarians come to power, it is swift and it is intended to create fear. And what we've seen in Florida is a complete upending of so many institutions. New College, which was considered one of a top school, at one point had the largest number of National Merit scholars. They gutted that college overnight. They removed leadership. They installed right-wing ideologues. They turned a real beacon of thought and intellectual, excellence into a right-wing machine. And it's hard to convey to people how swiftly it can happen. So number one, do not let normalcy bias create in you a false sense that if it happens, it won't be that bad. They can't get away with it because we've got lots of, there's legal structures and there's cultural structures, there's tradition that will stop it. None of that is true. And the second message from Florida is resistance works. We have clawed back much of what they took at the beginning. Resistance works because it brings a community together. There are people who never thought of themselves as political. There are parents who never thought they'd have to go to a school board meeting and demand that books be returned to the shelves, that some right-wing AstroTurf band of political operatives called Moms for Liberty not be allowed to replace their judgment with Moms for Liberty's political agenda. Resistance works. But we have time right now. We have time to stop this from happening, and we have to invest deeply in it. But I also think we have to understand how we got here. And we got here the way we always do. Someone in the comments said, I don't think it's just theocracy, and you're right, it's racism. The genesis of this is the demographic collision that America is experiencing right now. We are on the brink of being a country that does not have a single racial majority, a truly multiracial democracy. And for the people who are behind Project 2025, that is the existential fear for them. And so we've seen it before. Just in Florida, I can point to the Johns Committee. The Johns Committee went through public education and purged anyone who was a civil rights advocate. They purged anyone who was, quote, a known homosexual. They destroyed people's lives. They used all of the same hateful rhetoric to create a manufactured hysteria. And they were able to upend all of these structures. For a more contemporary example, Anita Bryant. Florida was on the front line passing a human rights ordinance that included sexual orientation in Miami. That became the launch pad for the so-called Save Our Children campaign that started in Florida and marched all the way across the country, leaving in place anti-LGBT bans on marriage, on adoption, on basic rights that took decades to undo. And who bankrolled Anita Bryant? It was the moral majority. They didn't care about abortion back then. What they cared about was integrated schools. So it is not an accident that we see in Project 2025 a coordinated attack on teaching honest history of racism in America. We have a governor who wants all of that removed, and instead their teachers are supposed to talk about slavery as though it were some jobs program. It is not an accident that censorship, rewriting of history, erasing of history go hand in hand. And I'm very glad that the connection between what is happening in the US and what is happening globally, the same right-wing evangelical funding network is bankrolling the criminalization of the existence of LGBTQ people in Uganda and the criminalization of anyone who advocates on behalf of the LGBTQ community, whether it's a parent, a friend, a coworker. It is making the idea of us illegal. And so if you want to know what is happening in the US, if you want to know what language is going to be used, look what Putin did with his laws criminalizing so-called, pro-LGBT propaganda. Look what's happening in Uganda. And if you follow the money, it is the exact same groups. And so this is about eliminating democracy and replacing it with a minoritarian government where the diversity of the population does not matter. And so we have to be very clear that in order to fight against this orchestrated attack on the LGBTQ community, and I put in the chat a link to a very quick cheat sheet for people who won't read all 900 plus pages, feel free to share that. But what I think people really have to understand is right now, this attack on the LGBTQ community, this racist repeal of the most basic civil rights, this vilification of immigrants, the snatching away of bodily autonomy, all of these things are tied together in an agenda that wants to shrink who holds power. And they do it by pitting us against each other. And so I want to leave everybody with the clarity that they intend to execute this with a swiftness that will leave people fearful and disorganized. And the thing about terror and the way you fight terrorism, which is what this is, they're threatening our families, they're threatening our safety, is to not be terrorized, to be angry, to organize, to be tactical, to engage, to be ourselves. Hiding has never saved us. Fighting back has always saved us. And so I think the most important thing people can take from this is take it seriously. Do not let fear or a bias towards normalcy stop you from seeing the wolf that is at the door. And also understand that what we've seen in Florida is when we lock arms, fight back against racism, fight back against the stripping of bodily autonomy, fight back against the demonization of immigrants, stand solidly 10 toes down at all times when they come after the trans community, thinking that we will abandon who they see as politically weak. And we will not, we never will. Understand that the only way through this is together, and that there is a way through it. And the thing that I hold on to is that we have been here before. We've experienced these backlashes before. And if we do not blink in this moment, if we have the courage to face it and fight it, on the other side of it is an incredible opportunity for progress in the same way they came after marriage, one state at a time, and in doing so ended up queuing up the circumstances that paved the way for marriage equality. Right now, we have a tremendous opportunity to create the backlash to the backlash and the incredible progress that can be made as a consequence of that. So Don't be fearful. Be clear. Be very clear-eyed about what we are facing. But stand together and we'll get through this.
Thank you so much. Nadine, I loved that you both reminded us that this is going to be swift and happen fast, and not to believe, the sort of, oh, well, I'm sure someone will stop it. And then you reminded us that it's going to be us who stops it when we fight back. So you gave us some hope. I'd like to introduce Daryll Manning, who's the Vice President of Impulse Group Atlanta. And Daryll, I'd like to ask you, from your perspective, how might Project 2025 reforms of health and research agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, and the National Institutes of Health, impact people living with HIV in the United States?
Hello, everyone. So I know we've called this thing a bunch of different things, but let's just call it what I'm going to call it. What I'm going to call it. It is a Christo-fascist document that is roaming around. But I want us to realize that it's nothing new, and it's already enacting. It's starting. It's happening right now. Today we had the Republican-backed House Appropriations bill that dropped today. And in that bill, it talked a lot about stripping and defunding and cutting and slashing of those entities that you just mentioned, the CDC, the NIH, the FDA. It put a lot of things in there. It wants to, and I had to take a few notes on this because it's new. I just saw it today. It wants to cut the Department of Health by 7%. It wants to cut the CDC by 22%. And we all know what hard on they have for the CDC post-COVID. That group, they hate the CDC because of what they did and what they said and what they didn't do and what they made them do during COVID. So we already know 22% cut by the CDC. That's right on par for what they want for the CDC. It also decided to fund the Health and Human Services Department $14 billion less than the Biden administration asked for. And it's a lot of language that's in this thing, words like social engineering. And we understand when you say social engineering, who that targets. It targets us. It targets the LGBTQ, because they say that we're engineering and we're creating and we're these anomalies and things that we shouldn't be. So for me, that bill today went ahead and showed that they're starting to enact this thing. It is exactly what they want. These are little steps that they're taking, and they're going ahead and getting Project 2025, getting the ball rolling on that one. For my group, an Impulse Group, one of our missions is we support, engage, and connect gaming globally. And these cuts to these programs, and a lot of this is in Project 2025, it really could hurt us a lot. It really could devastate our communities. We've come so far. We've come so far with HIV treatment, HIV care. We've come so far, and these cuts could really devastate that. It could set us back so far. And that's the reason why we have to stand up to things like this. And when I hear members of my community saying, well, I don't know, voting is, I'm not really going to vote. Your life is on the line. Your life is on the line. The tax that they have against 340B right now, 340B, which was enacted in 1992 to safeguard, hospitals and other entities with medication, making sure that pharmacies sell it at, a reduced rate, an affordable rate, along with Medicare and Medicaid, that's attack. They're attacking that right now. They have ads out right now that say things like 340B's funding health, and they're funding, they're giving insurance and medical care to immigrants, because they're using buzzwords. The immigrants are the buzzwords. The immigrants are what we're supposed to be attacking, what we're supposed to be afraid of, and they're attaching that to 340B. Your money is going towards that. No, 340B, your money's not going towards that. It's not going towards 340B. An attack on 340B is a direct attack on the LGBT community, especially when it comes to HIV, because that puts medications at risk of not being affordable. That knocks people out of care. That knocks people out of treatment. That makes things go on the rise. People stop becoming undetectable. You know, these things, these cuts to these programs and these government entities can be devastating to us and really put our lives at risk. I mean, for me, I feel like they're purposely trying to kill us. They're trying to eradicate us. And I think that's what Project 2025 is designed to do. It's to eradicate us and to wipe us out. And these cuts and these proposed defunding of different things, I mean, that's exactly what they want. And I implore everyone, please, please, please educate yourself on this. Understand that these things are happening and it's happening right now. It's not something that's going to come in 2025. It's starting right now in 2024. So that's what I just need us all to become focused on and realize that, like our sign here in our office says, diamonds are made in spaces between rocks and hard places. We're between a rock and a hard place right now. Are we going to come out diamonds? So, yeah, it's my take on that.
Thank you, Daryll. There are a number of questions that people have been asking. So I just wanted to know, or someone in the audience wanted to know, are there any protections we can influence Congress or Biden to put in place now that would make it more difficult to advance this agenda if Trump does get elected and Republicans get elected? Maybe I'll start with Anne Christine, because I know that she has some information about there are some breaks that we can, start pumping.
First of all, thank you. And I agree with Nadine. And I also want to urge everyone to look at Equality Florida for so many lessons that not just Equality Florida, but the communities that they have. We plan to consolidate and amplify those lessons. They also have lessons from other countries that we think are very important. I think a lot of you who are listening probably know that Viktor Orban in Hungary, that model is one of the models that the Project 2025 people are using for their attack on basically putting in place this pro-life policies. And in fact, they chose immigration and trans issues modeled in part by what Hungary had done. And Orban has now contracted with the Heritage Foundation to help implement Project 2025. But to get to the point of the breaks, a couple of things. I first of all wanted to give a little update. I think it's important to know this week I found out that as of this week, I think the Heritage Foundation, or the grouping, has now recruited 11,000 people into its future administrative service. And they've also already completed 150 executive orders from my sources, meaning that that's a taste of what they hope to bring in on day one. So to make a Nadine's point clear, they are planning to go in on day one. However, if you really look at it, it's also not going to be possible for them to do a lot of things. If you really even look at what happened under Trump, there are a lot of things one can put in place. There are different working groups that have been formed. And I'll just give you two examples that I'm looking at. Recently, one of the goals is to, as you heard, essentially transfer a large part of the what they call the merit-based civil service and put them into temporary political appointee positions in order to put in place these recruited loyalists into what are called acting positions. It's like if you transfer somebody out of a position, suddenly that position becomes empty. You can put somebody into an acting position, and then they want to give them authority. So they go in with the blueprint and they have 180 days to implement it with an instruction book. In fact, now, because of a new OMB rule, Office of Management and Budget, there's a process for that, and it's going to take them a lot longer to do it. At the very least, it's put a break of a couple of months on that. There also is a push to have what's called the Save the Civil Service Act, which, if we could have gotten it passed, if we could have gotten it into a vote, would have essentially removed Schedule F as a threat, and that would have really helped curb this plan. Unfortunately, we've just learned as of about 2 weeks ago that bill is not going, that's not going to be brought to a vote. So can that be changed? Maybe with a lot of political pressure, but that is one point. Finally, there are working groups, and that includes lawyers and different NGOs in different sectors who have come together. One of those sectors is what's called weaponizing of the government, and they're looking at all the different legal strategies that can be used in every single department of government to try to put in protections. And they're also working with all those departments and the heads of departments to say, how can we protect this? Since we've got the plan, let's make a counter plan. And I would just point you to the ACLU with other groups, including the Council for Global Quality and others, who have been releasing some of these analyses, particularly the legal analysis. We'll make them all available on our campaign website at Stop the Coup 2025. But just to know that people are very focused. And I think Nadine would be the first to tell you that there was a lot to do. When I started looking at this a couple months ago, like many people, I was like saying, what can we do? We're losing, it seems, every day and every week. But when you actually look at it on the ground in every single area, whether it's fighting library bans or fighting a school board or reversing a piece of legislation or fighting an amicus brief, we have a lot of victories. And so we need to understand that our job now is not only to tell people about Project 2025 and to talk to people about how it personally impacts them, but to look and identify and share the lessons that are not just from our own movement, but cross movements, as well as from other countries. And that's where we're focusing. We're focusing on what can we do? And as Nadine is right, we can fight back. And there's a lot we can do between now and 3 months from now. So get busy is my message.
Thank you, Anne Christine. Another question is, how do we organize ourselves so that we are equally, if not more, effective than the planners of Project 2025, including how can we counter message to combat the disinformation and propaganda? Does anyone want to take that?
Sure. I'll jump in. I spend more of my time doing policy work these days, but organizing is where my heart lives. And there's a lot of power in building community with other folks who are like you, who are hearing this message, and they're like, I'm fired up, I'm ready to go. And that work can be done through formal institutions, like some of the ones that were dropped in the chat, civic engagement organizations that have voter engagement programs like Equality Florida C4, and some of the other equality organizations, the Human Rights Campaign's PAC. And just like there are grassroots groups that sprung up, and created what is now Swing Left or Indivisible or Moms for Liberty, all these different groups, right? Trying to be a little nonpartisan there, a lot of nonpartisan there. You can create groups in your own community with folks who you've met on the internet, in some of the different Facebook groups you might be a part of, Slack chat channels. One of the things that's really important is getting this message out to people. And we know the most effective message is one-to-one conversation, whether that's canvassing and knocking on doors and talking to your neighbors, whether that's picking up the phone and just calling through your family list, because you'd be surprised the number of your loved ones who missed the election for one reason or the other, right? To make sure that they know what's going on and that they're able to join your efforts too. Phone banks, there's virtual phone banking options that different organizations have, or from the comfort of your home, you can make calls, or you can go to phone bank parties, which are always a lot of fun, that different organizations are throwing. You can create flyers and literally in your community, talk to people about what you've learned, have conversations about this and what's at stake this election. While I like being able to push people through to organizations that have infrastructure and have some really good data collection practices around this work, I also think it's beautiful when people are able to create magic on their own. And sometimes you're able to create even more powerful messages when people don't believe that there's another entity tied to you. So there's no wrong way to go about it, but do get involved, do encourage other people to get involved. And the last thing that I'll say, I threw it in the chat, I think, is around disinformation. I've never seen practice balloons like I have seen in the last 6 months of what I know to be our opponents creating fictional situations on the internet. The example that I gave during creating change earlier this year was around the color purple, right? There was literally a video. This is a non-political example, but tells you how this moves. There was a video of Taraji P. Henson in Oprah, right? No commentary at all. There's a whole entire story an influencer made up. Oprah was mad. Did you see that body movement? There's clearly an issue there. They created an entire beef when it was just really cold. They're up at the top of the Empire State Building. Nobody wants to be there, and they're waiting to stage the photo appropriately. But it completely tanked, a lot of, along with COVID, but, a lot of the momentum that the movie had, right? There are other examples like that in my mind are like, this is how quickly public narrative can be shifted on a lie. especially when it takes weeks for people to also respond, to just call out the most obvious thing, right? So when you see some of this disinformation moving in your social media and even amongst your friends, it has to be countered immediately with truth. Because what we've seen in the last 6 months is nothing. We are going to see so many lies about all kinds of people, all kinds of organizations that's going to be flaunted as truth. Things that might be true are going to be exaggerated in ways that the entire purpose is to depress voter turnout on our side and to have people think that their best option is to stay home to protest vote. Well, I saw how that worked out in 2016. People think you can protest vote and, you know, somebody who champions my issues still gonna make it in there by hook or by crook. And that's just not how politics works. It comes down to the numbers. And so we have to give people honest, sobering advice about this election. And we have to counter just like a 1-2 punch, as if you not that fighter. Think about a fighter that's unproblematic. You have to deliver a blow that's going to ensure that that lie is flattened, because the misinformation, the bots, the efforts that are being funded where they're literally paying people to put out lies and then paying for computers to then amplify those lies. You see the same message literally copy and pasted from 15 different accounts with completely different people that are seemingly innocent messages, until you realize it's systemic and it's intentional. And every single one of us can play a role in shattering disinformation.
If, first of all, thank you, Snaps, double click to all of that. I want to underscore one thing that you said, VKY, which is that the most powerful community organizing is the organizing you do in your community. I think the term community organizing can feel nebulous, or it can feel academic to people. It can feel like it's not attainable or reachable. I don't even know where to start with that. I hear people like Barack Obama as a community organizer, and I immediately think, oh, I'm not qualified to do that, right? But the truth is we're all community organizers, and specifically, we're all trusted messengers for particular people in our lives. My dad is never going to turn on MSNBC, watch a Rachel Maddow segment and say, yeah, I'm sold. I'm totally on board now. But he still picks up my phone calls because our relationship is built in trust and love. And so I can have difficult conversations in that space that he might not be willing to have with other people. Those are the places where we have to exercise that power and act as community organizers inside the spaces where we are the trusted messenger. And the other thing I'll say about messaging is something that Anne-Christine, you put in the chat, which is that our message is both simple and a winning one, which is freedom. We are actually fighting for what freedom means, not a hollow campaign slogan that someone slaps on a bumper sticker once every 4 years to try to get you to vote for them, but the real kind of freedom that allows you to be your whole, full, authentic self without being afraid that you won't be able to put food on the table or that you'll face discrimination and violence because of it. And that message really resonates with people. Talking about what freedom actually looks like resonates with people. Talking about the freedoms that are at stake at the intersections of the identities that people have, those things really resonate with people. People value equality, they value compassion, they value the idea that everyone is deserving of dignity and respect. And when we bring ourselves back to those core values over and over again and act as community organizers in our own communities, that's how we inoculate ourselves to the kind of vitriolic disinformation that this machine is putting out. As you said, VKY, we got to talk to people, actual people, not in the replies of a Twitter thread, but like face to face, the people we know and love. That's where the real work gets done.
I agree with all of that. Another thing that I think that we should do is talk to our allies. Allyship is really important. We talk to one another so much, and we understand what's happening with us. When we tell the stories of how cutting funding to the CDC and funding to other, health organizations can really affect our lives, how people can die from dropping out of treatment. When you tell those stories and you tell the stories of, parents who are deathly afraid of what's going to happen to their child who's non-binary, who's they want to support their child, but there's a law that's coming down and they don't know what to do. They may have to leave the state they're in to go to another state that's more accepting. When you start telling these stories to our allies and making them more impassioned to who we are, that gives them a little bit more of a reason and a focus and more of a drive to go out and vote. Also, another thing is a lot of us NGOs and nonprofits really work together. I know with an Impulse group, we don't have all of the answers, but we relied on other organizations who had something that we can use. We are partnering now with the organization Vote ER, and we're really pushing within the clinics within AHF because Impulse Group is an affinity group of AIDS Healthcare Foundation. We're getting the lanyards. It's bipartisan, it's nonpartisan, but at telling people, hey, are you registered to vote? You just click and scan my badge and it will direct them and guide them to where they have to vote. We partner with them to kind of streamline our voter registration process. So that's another way that we can all really get in this thing and combat and fight with this other side, by strengthening our power together.
There's another question in the chat that is very detailed. So one of the people in the audience is working with an organization just getting their start called Defeat Project 2025. And one of the biggest questions right now is the statements on pages 4 and 5, and then again on page 568 and 578. They can seemingly be combined, that LGBTQIA plus community members may be subject to the death penalty. The manifesto doesn't outright say this, but the inference is there. Is it people catastrophizing, or is there substance there? The ambiguousness of the document in some places leaves doors wide open for further harm to our community. And while that question seems terrifying, and I imagine that if people are hearing that for the first time and don't know about the anti-homosexuality bills, that may seem wild, but I think that there's some folks on who can clarify.
Can I just tackle that a little bit? I think that, is it catastrophizing? I think that it's very important to look at what is in that document and what is not, because every word of that document has been written both to be obtuse and to be specific. So no, it does not call for the eradication of LGBTQ people in that way. What it does do, however, is call for expanding in some ways the death penalty, including the people who are federal prisoners right now. They wants to change that and be able to allow them to basically be, what they call is carry out the policy, meaning put those people to death if that is if that's what they're facing. And so there's a slippery slope, right? But I think what is really critical is that it criminalizes people. And what we're seeing in countries like Uganda, which I think are not only just Florida, but we need to look at Uganda and other countries like that, because what happens is when you criminalize, you are not only saying these people are not worthy, you're dehumanizing and you're subjecting them to violence. And so that is what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of attacks. We're seeing vigilante things. And, we saw a little bit of that in different times. But if we look back at our own American history, we don't have to look far to see what happens when you begin to dehumanize people. So I think it's really critical for us to be very specific and to talk about that. But it doesn't say that in the document exactly. And I think it's really important it's kind of like what I think of is we don't need to go further than what this document says. It's such a draconian attack on us. Let's be specific about what it says. It's the same thing, around looking at, for example, some of the health attacks. People are saying, does this mean people with HIV will not get any more medicine? No, that's not what it says. What it says is it will cut federal funding in particular ways. It'll cut funding possibly to the Health and Human Services. That could impact HRSA, which is the agency that funds Ryan White. Really what this does is it takes the whole system of what is called federal government and tries to punt it to the states. And in that way, it also not only does that, but it gives it to tries to give it to private contractors and gives it to private money. And somebody in the chat put in this document, I think it's something very important, which is, isn't there an economic or profit motive to this whole plan? And absolutely it is, and it does. This plan is, I want to say, it's funded not only by someone that was named Leonard Leo, who is a militant Catholic and a judicial activist who helped put people on the Supreme Court who are conservatives, but it's backed by a bunch of other billionaires. And those billionaires have an agenda. And this agenda, when you step back from it on the economic level, it calls for huge deregulation in all areas of industry. It allows them to basically do business the way they want to without a lot of impediments. And that spells profit. And that is why they're behind it. And I don't talk about Trump because this is a document of the conservative movement. However, we are seeing discussion, and we saw in the past 2-3 weeks meetings between the candidates, and we saw these essentially, a promise to say, if you vote for me, I will not get in your way if you are going to want to do X, Y, or Z as a business or corporate leader. So it's really a document that is manifesting not just, as we call it, autocracy, but giving the 1% enormous benefits. And that's why it's also getting support, not just because people are supporting the Christian nationalist agenda, although a lot of them are.
So among the things I think people should be aware of, it's not catastrophizing. The vagueness of the laws in Florida, for example, were intended to cast a much bigger shadow than the letter of the law. It was intended to create an environment of such fear that people would be removed from their jobs, elected leaders would be removed, that they would comply in advance to what the actual specific law said. They are always testing the boundary. How much can we get away with? We would have said our country would never separate immigrant children from their parents. Not only did we separate immigrant children from their parents, the Trump administration made sure that the path of reuniting them was obliterated, because the intention is to create a sense of terror, not because the law says it, but because they are testing how much we will allow to be done in our name, how much we will allow to be normalized.
Nadine, would you agree, though, that it's important for us to be very clear as we're speaking tonight about what's in the plan and not? I just meant that it's not saying that it's advocating killing gay people. I just wanted to be clear about it.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, I think we should absolutely be talking about what's in it. But one of the lessons from Florida is the distance between what the law specifies and then what the law permits to have done. And part of the reason we got such a complete settlement that hit all of the major issues in the Don't Say Gay, Don't Say Trans law was precisely because the shadow of the law, what was the evil, toxic spirit of the law, was giving license to things that the letter of the law could not defend.
Yes.
So
I agree, absolutely. I agree.
And when we look around,
we are seeing this when you look at the cuts on LGBT funding. We're seeing the retreat of corporations and businesses from DEI. It is the step of autocracy to be able to have a chilling effect where people essentially volunteer to silence themselves. So we need to recognize it as such, and we need to act to stop that. Speaking out is the big thing that we need to do.
Yeah, the threats to pride this year, you look at that, we're having a training within AHF on how to protect ourselves during pride because of these groups who are threatening and issuing threats to different pride parades and pride festivals this year. And all of this has been ramped up by this rhetoric, this talk, these targeted attacks on LGBTQ. It's like they're bad, they're evil, go after them. And that's where all of this is coming from. So these are the type of things that we got to watch out for. It's little attacks like that, getting people all ramped up and really to make us fearful, to say, hey, we're not going to go out there. We're not going to go and put ourselves in risk and danger this year. No, we have to stand up against that.
Well, the second part of what I wanted to convey is the language of these laws and the rhetoric that surrounds the passage of this is also intended to create an atmosphere where stochastic violence, where the increase in hate crimes, where the things that happen beyond what the language is, it creates an environment where people feel as though they can go into a business and yank down the pride displays and menace store clerks and attack people for having rainbows stickers. And we go into Pride season with all of these Homeland Security alerts. And I am so proud of our community because we are showing up at Pride in record number, and our allies are showing up at Pride in record number. And instead of cowering and backing away, people are showing up who don't even, never go to Pride. But this time it means something. This time it matters. And so that's the spirit that we have to cultivate in our community, is We get it. They're trying to scare you. Refuse to be afraid. Be who you need in your life and stand up. And so I do think that this is a critical moment where everybody's checking each other's body language, but I'll use Florida again as an example. We were able to kill 21 out of 22 horrible anti-LGBT bills. And how were we able to do it? Because resistance works, and because we were able to demonstrate to people that the tide is turning, that Moms for Liberty can't get away with their BS when real parents show up to stand up for their kids who are actually in the schools. And so it's not home runs, it's base hit after base hit after base hit, and we got to show up for that work. And it's harder, and it's even harder when it's murky, you know, where the law says this, but how it's being implemented goes so much further. You know, where parents have to walk past a gauntlet, not just of Moms for Liberty, but their armed goons, you know, the Proud Boys. But you know what? Parents were willing to walk past those goons and stand up for their kids. So that's the spirit that I want people to leave here with. Clarity on the letter of Project 25, but absolute clarity on the intention that goes beyond the letter of it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for
I just
that.
want to add briefly on to what Nadine just said, because I think it is so important. We did our National Equity Week, which ended in a demonstration right outside of the White House. We passed, you know, Congress, Supreme Court, et cetera. And Kiara Johnson, the executive director of the National LGBTQ Task Force, got up on the stage and repeatedly said, "We are winning." And it was hard to digest in the moment because we're fighting so much right now. It does not feel like it, right? But the more she kept reiterating it and repeating it, I allowed the words, I kind of allowed my muscles to quit tensing up as it was initially. Like, we still got a lot of fighting to do. And I thought about what Nadine was just saying. The reason why they are pushing back as hard as they are and boldly putting their plans in public, because what they're doing isn't new. What is new is how boldly they are putting it in public and trying to leverage it in the public sphere for here and abroad. But what they're responding to is in 2018, when history says that the sitting president is not going to do well in that first term election, we had a record number of LGBTQ plus people elected to office, people of color and women elected to office. In 2020, again, things were shifted and changed in big ways because people turned out to vote. In 2022, again, the history books would have told us that we were to be counted out. Everything going back like 150, 160 years said we were not going to have progressives win in the numbers that we wanted, and yet we did. And so this is their Hail Mary, quite literally, of trying to stop what in political science we call a realignment. Realignments that's happening both politically in terms of how the parties are being restructured in different ways, again, kind of keep it nonpartisan, but also in the direction of this country and how the country is moving in terms of its alignment for who we see ourselves to be. This is their last chance. They see it as their last chance. And we've already shown that we have the fortitude, the perseverance, and the grit to get it done. We're winning. As Kiara kept saying, I'm gonna just start repeating it too. We are winning, but the only way we continue to win is to never, as Nadine started, to never cede ground. We have to keep going, and we can't take it for granted.
Thank you so much for that, VKY. I love that, by the way. I'm going to call you that. I want to thank all of the panelists and thank you to the audience for the great questions. When queer people are under attack, what do we do? Act up, fight back. When trans people are under attack, what do we do? Act up, fight back. We can't silence ourselves. Nadine made this point. Victoria made this point. I think everybody made this point. Somebody said, mentioned Timothy Snyder's book in the chat. You know, we can't obey before they even tell us what we're supposed to stop. We need to organize our community and keep each other safe. If Trump wins and if Trumpists get into power, the first step is to stop them. The second step is to begin to build the infrastructure that is needed for progressive candidates that we actually have trust in, that will protect our communities in the next election. So I'm going to turn it back over to Memory and Chromatic Black to close us out. Or maybe I'm just closing it out. Okay, this is one in a series.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I thought I was talking to myself backstage. Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you to all of our wonderful, amazing panelists for the work that you all do every single day to fight for our rights. It is incredible, it's inspiring, and we thank you so much for just providing and sharing the information and spreading it far and wide. And you're right, Jen, it really is so important that we protect each other. And in a time such as this, it's really time for us to get future ready. I'm not doing a shameless plug, but Chromatic Black's next series is going to be called Get Future Ready. And it's really about looking at how we can build resiliency given a devastating result in November. What do we do next? So if you all are interested in that topic, please like, follow, share, so you can learn more about that. And then also, I wanted to call attention, Jen, you mentioned a little bit earlier that CPD has a training program. Can you talk just very quickly about that and share that information?
Yeah, so if you want to learn about Project 2025, you can get 15 people and a room. We'll travel out to your community. I just spent the weekend in Maine talking to some folks who live a few blocks away from Leonard Leo. And that was really exciting, and we're happy to do that anywhere. And also, if you can only get a Zoom, we'll try to join a Zoom as well. We actually are trying to organize you, and we're trying to do it before it's too late. So, before we don't have a favorable outcome in this election. So I'd love to be in touch with any of you. We also can do trainings on tactics, like bird dogging, the simple act of asking questions to your electeds. How do they stand on any of the issues that are important to you that are outlined in Project 2025 is a great way to shine a light on it. And if they give an answer that's really egregious, it can really take off and combat some of that disinformation. So sign up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And also, everyone, just want to remind you in the chat, there's a link for you to register for the upcoming town halls. We are talking about public education, August 29th. We are also talking about, we have our second climate justice event happening on September 12th. And then September 29th, we're talking about immigration. And then lastly, in October, we'll be talking about racial equity. So if you're interested in this series, please make sure to register, share this out with your networks and your community so that we can have as many important voices, all voices are important, but at the table as possible. Also, if you are interested in joining us at the town hall or any of our summits as a host, as a panelist, as a moderator, there's also a link in the chat to a password protected landing page. We did that on purpose. The password is Win Together. When you're on that page, a pop-up will show up where you can fill out the form and let us know that you're interested, or if you know anyone or any groups that might be good for these particular topics. So please share that with us. We really want to spread this as far and wide as possible. And to Anne's point, Project 2025 was not being discussed the way that it is now. And we are thankful to be part of a group and a network that is helping to highlight this message and highlight the importance of the work that we need to do from now until November and beyond. So thank you all for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you at the next town hall. Have a wonderful summer. Have a happy July. We're taking a break in July. So have a happy summer, and we will see you all again in August. Thank you so much, and good night.